I think it's time we get started. So my name is Chaz Davis and from United in Stride, and I want to welcome all of you to our 8th installment of the United in Stride workshop series. And this one is called The Most Common Running Injuries and What to Do About Them. And as you just heard from Dr. Bryan Kent and his business partner, Dr. Steve Lasky, they'll be providing us with an evidence-based presentation on what those most common running related injuries are, what we can do to treat them, and then also even possibly prevent them from happening in the first place. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about a few items. And so we have some members from Team with a Vision that will be running the Boston Marathon with us on October 11th. And so Team with a Vision is the Massachusetts Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired's official Boston Marathon charity team. And we also have a team of time qualified Boston Marathon runners who are visually impaired as well. And so joining us as well that you just heard his voice is Richard Hunter. And Richard Hunter, many of you know, is a staple in the blind world for running and is just instrumental in really linking so many guides and blind runners together for various distances. But he coordinates the United States Association of Blind Athletes Blind National Championships for the marathon at the California International Marathon. And Richard has recently joined United in Stride for a pilot program in Northern California. And it's really focused on increasing participation for runners kind of getting into running or walking or just being active. And so I'll just give Richard a minute or two to give us a brief overview on what he's been up to over the last few months.
Yeah, hi Chaz. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm partnering with United in Stride for this, what I'm calling the NorCal United in Stride pilot project. And really what the intent of this is, Chaz was talking about, is to try to engage more people at all ability levels at the regional level. So what we found that through the Team with a Vision experience, through the USABA Marathon National Championships and things like that, that we're able to bring together people in community, and we see what great value that has to us as visually impaired people, and in terms of building the community of guides, et cetera. What has always been kind of missing in this is that people, if they're more at the entry level of their, power walking, jogging, running journey, they really haven't had the same kind of access to these type of opportunities. Not only that, we really don't even necessarily know what types of resources would help these beginning people or people at just shorter distances be successful in their own communities. Because really the goal of United in Stride is to help visually impaired people and guides be able to independently network and connect. And we also want to make sure that people have the tools they need to be able to be independent in their own communities with accessing guide support. So that's what we're doing out here in Northern California, between the Sacramento region and the Bay Area region, is coming together. And I'm coordinating as kind of a kickoff event, this Johnny Cash event that we have here in Folsom called the Folsom Breakout Blues. And we have a half marathon, 2-person relay, and a 5K option. So we're incorporating some walkers and some people who are just kind of at that 10K distance, and some half marathoners. And we have 21 people taking part. And we're using this kind of launch this sort of awareness in this region, and then also hopefully to continue to build on community partners in this area, so that we have more guides for people at all these different levels, and just to kind of blow it up and find out what resources we need to expand upon this, and use this as a pilot project to see if, like, okay, if we can be successful here, what is it going to take to be able to do similar things in other regions? And so we just have some things to learn, and stay tuned in the future to see how this might expand into United in Stride version 2. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And we're really excited for how that all materializes, and we're just very hopeful that it can be replicated in other areas of the country too, and just increase that overall participation for activity in the blind and visually impaired communities. And so Dr. Bryan Kent, he's a lifelong athlete, competed in team sports growing up, but began running at a pretty early age. Ended up running Division III cross country and track and field. After college, participated in triathlons and was even a competitor at the Amateur World Triathlon Championship in Gold Coast, Australia. And he graduated from New York Chiropractic College in 2016, and that's where he met his best friend and business partner, Dr. Steve Lasky. And after a few years, they opened up a practice together called Forward Spine and Sport. And so both of them have an immense level of experience and knowledge working with athletes across multiple disciplines, and just really are excellent in working with people and meeting them where they are so that they can get moving in the way that they want to and the way that they need to. And Dr. Lasky, after graduating from New York Chiropractic College, joined an organization called World Spine Care, and he's a spine care specialist as well. And so World Spine Care really focuses on serving underserved communities across the world and just ensuring that they have access to top-notch spine care. And Dr. Lasky is pretty active himself. He loves to do CrossFit and is a runner in his own right. And so tonight, the way our presentation will work is Dr. Kent and Dr. Lasky will speak, and we'll have time at the end for some questions. But as questions do arise, feel free to put them in the chat so that Dr. Kent and Dr. Lasky can see that and perhaps even answer some of those questions along the way. But we will have time at the end for some questions and answers as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bryan Kent and Dr. Steve Lasky. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. You did your research. That was, I don't think I can do a better introduction for myself. So there really isn't much more to say there. Other than our internet was cutting in and out, so we had to switch. But I don't know if Chaz mentioned that our practice is in Boston, and I believe we're reaching more than just the New England area right now. Is that true, Chaz?
Sorry?
Are most of the folks present tonight in the New England, Boston area, or are we kind of branching out?
Yeah, because we do have our United in Stride community, which is our database across North America, we have people in Canada, California, so really across North America. So it's a pretty diverse group, I'd say.
Heck yeah. We are super pumped to be here. This is a group that I've really wanted to connect with for a long time, ever since meeting and working with Kyle Robideau and his guide, Corey Gardner, both just two fabulous human beings who I, love as human beings and call them friends. And they've been poking me and prodding me to get involved with you all for a couple of years now. And Kyle keeps poking me to start guiding. So that is a long-term goal of mine. I just need to get my fitness to a place where it was reliable enough that I know I can be up to the challenge. But so we're really excited to be here with you all tonight and chatting with you all tonight. And so we're going to do our best to keep this active and keep this super informative. Like Chaz said, the goal of tonight is introducing the best evidence that we have available clinically in the realm of pain and running related injuries, starting with kind of the most common. And what we have discovered is that, every time we do this talk or a version of this talk, we learn something through the people attending, but we also are finding that in 45 minutes, we get pretty heady and we get really into the science. And for some people, it's great and they love it. And we kind of deep dive on kind of the myth busting and some of the cultural dogma around injuries and running pain. And so sometimes we don't get through all 4 or 5 injuries that we were planning to, and we get through 2, but we get really into the meat and potatoes, so to speak. And so we're hoping to get as far into this presentation as possible, but we want to leave time for questions at the end. So if you have a specific running or non-running related pain or injury or something that you have questions about, throw it in the chat if you feel comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable, Chaz, did you provide email contact information for us or Instagram or anything like that?
Not yet, but I will at the conclusion of the meeting.
Amazing, amazing. So you can feel free to reach out to us anytime. Just say, you were there when we spoke with Chaz and with United in Stride and Team with a Vision, and we're happy to help out. We really think the key to our success is really our patient success. And for us, that really comes with community involvement and education and empowering you all to do the amazing things that you want to do. And if you're guiding to help you guide, your teammate, your partner. So I'm just gonna, for our reference here, kind of pop up our presentation. And the other thing that we do is we try not to get too into like the anatomy and whatnot, because sometimes we're just too clinical. So Chaz, if we're speaking, for and we're not making sense, please interrupt us and say, hey, could you explain that not as a clinician? that is not offensive to us at all. So please, keep us honest in that aspect.
I appreciate it.
Again, I did it. I did it. Now I just need to share. Chaz, do you mind if we screen share or for our kind of presentation, just for our reference, so that we can kind of stay on point, or do you want me to have it in a sidebar? Okay. You have disabled screen sharing at the moment.
All right.
Chaz, while you're doing that, I'm going to step out real quick, and Steve is going to get us started.
Get that going up again. All right, let's see if we can get that rolling again.
You should be able to screen share now, I believe.
Yep, just getting it up. Okay. Right. So can everybody see that right now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So like Bryan mentioned, we're just gonna cut through a little bit of the loading into stuff. Of the big injuries that a lot of the runners tend to kind of see in the running world, I'm gonna turn this over a little bit so you don't have to look at late.
And Steve, real quick too, just if there are any images that you are showing, if you can describe that a little bit, because some of our participants are blind or visually impaired and might not be able to see that.
That is exactly our plan. We're actually planning to kind of walk through in pretty good detail everything we're gonna be doing for drills. I just want to get to the one that we're going to cover. So the one that we're going to start off with. So as Bryan was kind of mentioning, with running kind of comes this myriad of textbook injuries that have this dogma kind of centered around them. Those typically tend to be, shin splints, plantar heel pain or plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendon pain, Achilles tendonitis, and hamstring injuries. Those seem to be the ones that constantly end up in our office. Those tend to be the ones that we're constantly kind of myth busting on and progressing textbook rehab for more evidence-based rehab along the way. The ones we really wanted to focus on tonight are plantar fascia pain, or calcaneal pain, heel pain, however you want to label it, and Achilles tendon pain. So I'm going to flip over to the plantar foot pain because that's pretty much what we see the majority of out of all the four. So as far as plantar fasciitis goes, this is commonly known as, base of the heel pain. And it's really a diagnosis that gets kind of just catapulted or shotgunned out into the world when you pretty much have any runner who has pain at the bottom of their foot. A lot of times this is a diagnosis that's kind of just thrown out surface level. If you've ever been to a specialist, a PT, another chiropractor, somebody who's you try to seek help with for this, and they've kind of more or less picked up your foot, pushed at the base of the heel and said, "Is that your pain?" And you go, "Yep." It's kind of a oversimplified / what we would even say is like a lazy way of diagnosing plantar foot pain, because you're not really taking the opportunity to distinguish out the tissues that are at the bottom of the foot. And the plantar fascia itself is actually extremely superficial. It's the first layer of tissue down between the calcaneus or the heel bone and the remainder of the foot going forward. So kind of digging your thumb or pushing into all that tissue underneath it included is not really a good way of excluding out other structures. What Bryan and I have kind of seen over time is that if you have true legitimate plantar fascia pain, if you go through the standard evidence-based protocol of rest, icing it, some time off, decreasing mileage, fasciitis means literally inflamed fascia. So if you give it some rest, time off, do all those things, it will improve. But for all those people who go through that protocol and they don't see any improvement, will kind of lead you to believe that it's not plantar fasciitis. So the best way to approach this is distinguishing out if you have more of a short flexor tendinopathy, which basically would translate to the short stabilizing muscles in your foot if you have an issue with those, or if you actually end up having some nerve irritation around the heel, which is kind of reproducing that pain that's similar to plantar fascia pain as well. So these are three options I was talking about for the nerve pain. You have your medial calcaneal nerve, which is one of the nerves at the heel. You have your inferior plantar nerve, which is another nerve at the base of the heel. And then that tendinopathy for that muscle group right there, which is again, basically just the short stabilizing muscles that connect from your toes down through the base of the heel that help provide all that stability through the foot. Right.
All right. So an easy way to kind of understand where the nerves are on the bottom of your foot is if you took your right foot and crossed it over your lap like you would sit casually and comfortably, like a figure 4, and then made a peace sign with your left hand and wrapped both fingers around the heel bone, one just in front of it and one on the heel bone itself. The middle finger of your left hand would be the medial calcaneal nerve. The index finger would be the inferior plantar nerve, and where your fist is around your ankle bone is exactly where those nerves kind of split and fork in the road. So we have had patients who experience plantar foot pain who are experiencing it in the medial calcaneal nerve or the inferior plantar nerve, and they have nothing wrong with those two tissues themselves. And the problem is actually up in the ankle in an area we call the tarsal tunnel, which is almost the same thing as carpal tunnel. It's just for the ankle. And so very often there's a saying in clinical practice, if you think the problem is where it hurts, it's not. And very often, if you're only addressing the local or specific area of pain, you're going to miss something. The other cool one we have seen is actually a low back issue that has presented with like plantar foot pain, that they were a runner. And so classically you got a runner with plantar foot pain. They're like, I have plantar fasciitis. And actually they had a disc herniation in their low back that was compressing the nerve root associated with the bottom of the foot. So we treated their low back and their foot pain went away in like a day. It was wild. It like even shocked me, which, I mean, I actually am surprised all the time in practice at some of the things that happen. Okay. So starting with, yeah. So when it comes to, so everyone was probably asking the question, okay, so if I have nerve pain, how do I treat my nerve, right? I've tried ball rolling, I've tried stretching, I've tried Graston, I've tried self-massage, and none of these things seem to be helping. And nerves are really, really finicky structures in the sense that they are supposed to be sensitive as a rule. It's their job. And so when it comes to running and repetitive motion type activities, we have found that very often the first thing to actually kind of exceed its capacity for stress is the nerve. And it works in that way as an early warning sign to say, yo, human, listen up. You're doing a lot of something that's really hard and really stressful. I'm not hurt yet, but I am the first structure to let you know that trouble could be on the way. Doesn't mean it is. Doesn't mean that the nerve is injured or damaged or inflamed. It's just part of a warning signal from your body to let you know that things are accumulating. So that doesn't answer the question how to treat a nerve. So nerves, like most tissues in the body, are dependent on movement. Every time you walk, every time you stand and move, your nerves are being mobilized and elongated and almost like pumped. I'm sure many of you are familiar with like swelling in the legs, and that one of the best remedies for swelling legs is going for a walk. The reason that is because the muscular action of your calf squeezes the blood back up to the heart, and nerves respond to that type of stimulus as well. They need the squeezing action of your tissues. They need that motion. And so very frequently we find that people with nerve type pain will have pain after they've been seated for either a short amount of time or a long amount of time or first thing in the morning. And those are typically classic quote unquote hallmark signs of plantar fasciitis. When in reality, they're probably more related to nerve pain, but also tendon pain. So to treat a nerve, you need to mobilize the nerve. And mobilizing a nerve is very different than stretching a nerve, because a nerve that is sensitive has the capacity to send a signal to the brain when it is being stretched. And that sensation is not necessarily therapeutic. If you think about it from the perspective of the nerve is sensitive, it's accumulating the stress of running, and it is constantly sending sensory signals to the brain. It's just on rapid fire. If you're increasing that nerve's job, if you're making it work harder, if you're making it send signals such as like a deep stretch that borderlines on painful, all you're doing is telling the nerve, hey, you've got a good reason to be sensitive and pissed off right now. So very often when we do this treatment with people, they say, I don't feel a whole lot. I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything. And our response is most often, good, you shouldn't be feeling a lot. We don't want this to be one of these things where you feel like you have to work through the pain. You have to outsmart the pain. You have to outwork it intelligently versus outworking it aggressively and violently. Anything, guys?
Yeah, no, just to kind of reiterate what Bryan said, I mean, nerves are very fickle structures. And if you think about the fact that nerves physically live in the tissue of the muscle, they're not capable of moving themselves. They do move, they do slide, they do wiggle, but they're coming along for the ride of the tissue that they're trapped in. The muscles do all the moving actions for our body, regardless of its head, arm, leg, wherever. And all those nerve tissues have to be able to wiggle, glide, and slide appropriately through those tissues. So that's the biggest thing, because that stimulation is what will have the nerve kind of resensitize or desensitize itself to a more comfortable level. So it's not constantly firing off those alarm signals saying, you're irritating me, I'm uncomfortable. Now I'm going to start firing off actual pain versus more of that warning, kind of like take care of me versus now we have a problem.
So a few quick little educational tidbits that is going to make understanding this rehab much simpler are the cardinal directional movements of the foot. So if you take your foot and you point your toes to the ground, that's plantar flexion. If you pull your toes towards your knee, that's dorsiflexion. And if in a dorsiflex state, so toes to knee, you try and bring your pinky toe to the outside of your knee, that's eversion. We're going to need all of those to kind of understand what we're doing in this next rehab, because very often you have 3 major nerves that run down the bottom of the leg. And we have to, when we're mobilizing nerves, we have to manipulate the ankle in a way that puts that nerve through an elongated state, but not a stretched state. The difference between an elongated state and a stretched state is perception. So it's all on what you feel, because we have patients who can do, they can bring their leg all the way up to their head and then dorsiflex and evert their ankle, and they don't feel anything, but they still have neural dysfunction. We have to take them a little further. Then we have other people who would just be lying flat on the table who dorsiflex and evert, and they're like, yep, I feel it. And that's all due to the sensitivity of the nerve. And it's not good or bad, it just is. And so there's no goal range of motion, there's no goal feeling here except to move the nerve without pissing it off. That's the whole goal, because then what happens is the nerve A starts to move through its range of motion. It starts to get the pumping action that's therapeutic for it, but it also has the sensory stimulus to the brain that it is mobile and functional without being painful. And so this is all almost like a trick in a way. The other thing about this kind of treatment is that it can be very short-lived. Because what's going to happen is you're going to do something that resensitizes the nerve. And so usually when we prescribe this, we give kind of a ridiculous number of repetitions to do, depending on how much pain they're in and depending on how they respond to the treatment. And some people need to do 30 repetitions once a day. Some people need to do 30 repetitions 6 to 10 times a day. It just really depends on, when's your race, when's your next hard workout. But at a minimum for my runners, I say first thing in the morning, before a workout, after a workout, and any time that you're experiencing pain. So let's say you've been sitting for 4 hours, you get up, your foot hurts. Okay, drop to the ground or from a seated position and mobilize that nerve. Just remind it that it's okay and that it's happy and that it's functioning just fine. Versus, okay, my foot hurts, I'm going to smash a lacrosse ball into it. And clinically, or not clinically, in the moment, it will feel better, but it's only because you're bombarding the nerve with a different stimulus of deep pressure. And the signal of deep pressure to the brain moves faster than the signal of pain. And so it's the same thing if you whack your thumb with a hammer or you stub your toe, you're generally going to squeeze the finger or the toe that you just whacked without really knowing why. And for some reason, it feels better. It's because it's a built-in pain mitigating mechanism into your neurology so that you can control your pain. Okay, great. Okay, so for either the bottom of the heel, dead center of the heel bone, or the pain that is, very classically ascribed to quote unquote plantar fasciitis right in front of it, about an inch towards the toes from the center of the heel, the mobilization of this nerve will work both of those nerves. And I use it every day at this point, unless it's not nerve, in which case we've already teased that out and then it's not going to be helpful. So this is one of those things that if you try it at home, you do 20 to 30 reps, maybe 4 or 5 times, and you feel better, great, keep doing it. You do it for 3 or 4 days, doesn't feel any better, might not be the thing that's actually wrong, and you may want to consider something else or get some sort of clinical evaluation depending on how much pain you're in. Okay, so we're going to walk through this, and Chaz, again, if we are not doing a good job, you call us out. We'll keep explaining until it makes sense. So to do this the most efficiently and by yourself, you're going to take a seated position on like your bed or your couch, and we're going to use the right leg for an example. I'm going to use a band that is going to wrap around the ball of my foot, but you can use a rope or a dog leash or really anything, doesn't matter. A belt is fine. And the reason I have this is so that I can provide a little bit of extra tension that I can't produce under my own muscular force. And so from this position, my body is taking an L shape where I'm just sitting upright and my right leg is extended fully in front of me to make the shape of an L. And my left leg is just dangling off the bed, or in this case, it's our treatment table. But you don't want both legs out in front of you. You want one relaxed to the side, usually the asymptomatic leg or the non-painful leg. And then from here, what you're thinking about is the mechanics of this nerve. And so if we go back to our kind of peace sign model here, where you've got your right heel and then your left hand with the middle finger over the heel bone and your index finger in front of it about 1 inch. And then if you trace up your shin behind your ankle, all the way to the middle portion of your knee, inside portion of the knee, that is the path of the nerve. So in order to put that nerve on a little bit of tension, I have to take my foot and bring it toes to knee and then pinky toe to the outside of the knee. And when I'm doing that in this position, I feel the tiniest little bit of tension right behind my ankle bone on the inside and a little bit up, 3 or 4 inches. For some of you, you may experience this tension behind the knee. You might experience it in the hamstring. You might experience it in the calf. You might not experience it at all. If you don't experience it at all, what you're going to do is just pull on the band and lift your leg off the bed or the couch or even the floor if you're sitting on the floor until you get the sensation of tension. After that, you're going to return to kind of the resting point where the foot is just kind of dangling and a little bit toes pointed towards the wall that is in front of you. The other portion of this is that we have to involve the rest of the spinal cord because all the nerves run to the brain. And so when the foot is relaxed, I'm going to tuck my chin to my chest, and then I'm just going to bend forward ever so slightly at the waist, almost like a runner's, or we called it a hurdler stretch, or like a toe touch stretch. But again, we're not stretching. We're just creating a little bit of tension. And then what we're going to do is we are going to couple those movements into like a little bit of dance. And so I usually pretend that my nose and my big toe are attached by a tight piece of string so that when my pinky toe comes up and out to try and touch the outside of my knee, I look up to the sky to slack the spinal cord in the spinal canal so that I can put tension on the nerve towards the foot. Because if I'm pulling the nerve from both directions and I'm stretching it at my head and I'm stretching it at my foot, all I'm going to do is irritate this nerve because it needs to be wiggled and glided. It doesn't need to be stretched because stretching nerves robs them of their blood supply, which is inherently a bad thing. And it's especially not a great thing if the nerve is already angry at you. And so it looks like a little dance where I look up to the sky and then I'm again bringing toes to knee and then pinky toe to the outside of the knee. And then I point the toes to the wall in front of me, tuck my chin, do a little forward stretch and reverse it, look up to the sky. And again, toes to knee, pinky toe to the outside of the knee. And I'll repeat this 30, 40 times in a row. Steve, you usually do what, 20, 30, somewhere in that neighborhood?
You like ballpark 20, give or take, patient.
The number is not clinically specific. It is simply a quantity. It's a numbers game. Think about nerve pain like a bank account. If you are in pain, it means you have taken too many withdrawals without doing enough deposits. When it comes to this type of nerve pain in the foot, most things are going to be a withdrawal, even if they don't cause pain in the moment. And the things that are deposits are sleep and nerve flossing or nerve mobilization, or to some extent, very specific nerve-based soft tissue work, which is very superficial, it's very gentle, and it doesn't hurt at all. Whereas like traditionally, we're like, oh, I really need to, beat the heck out of this thing to make it feel better. That's actually the opposite of what you want to do. And I've had many, many, many cases where I've had patients come in from other providers who are getting deep tissue and they just feel worse and worse. And even myself, I've tried to do some sort of soft tissue work and I've done too much. And they came back and they're like, yeah, that was too much, even though I barely felt anything in the moment. So it's very, very person specific. So that there in and of itself, as simple as it sounds, when done repetitively in these high volume numbers, 20 to 30, 3 to 4 times a day, you should see a difference within potentially the first day if it is nerve-based pain. Sometimes what we find is that it is something else that also has created sensitivity in the nerve. And so you need to find that other thing. And so maybe you'll get 10, 20, 50% better, but then you kind of plateau. And that's because it's not primary nerve pain, it's secondary nerve pain, which all sounds very confusing. The good news is that if you have nerve pain, this exercise is nearly bulletproof if you do enough reps.
I crushed it.
Okay. I think you crushed it. Okay. So that the principles of nerve pain are going to come up time and time again in this presentation, because nerves are very finicky and they don't need a whole lot of repetitions, but they don't need a high stimulus. They need a low stimulus. And so nerve pain is less is more, or Goldilocks is the thing that I usually say. If you do too much, you're going to piss it off. If you don't do enough, you might not feel any better. You have to do just the right amount. And so, yeah, that's, I always feel kind of silly explaining this exercise because people often are doing so many other things, especially for plantar foot pain. They're doing the ball rolling, the ice water bottle, the stretching, the sock, the night splint. And we usually don't prescribe any of those things as long as they respond to this. The other thing that is helpful is acupuncture or dry needling, because you can actually treat the nerve with the needle and an electrical current. So that's a good option as well. We're going to switch roles here. Steve is going to kind of take over the helm here, and we're going to walk through tendinopathy. Did we talk about how it's not? Oh yeah, you talked about tendinitis.
We talked about, yeah.
Okay, so just as Steve was saying about plantar fasciitis being an inflammation of the tendon, tendinitis is an inflammation of the tendon, and most often it is not inflamed. It is a chronic presentation that has accumulated over days, weeks, months, even years in some cases, that only begins to hurt when you finally tip the scales past the amount of stress the tendon can handle. We see this most frequently in marathon training, 3 to 4 weeks after people start doing track workouts and speed workouts, if they've never done them, or they haven't done them in a long time, or they're a first-time marathoner or a first-time runner, or somewhere after the 10 to 12 mile mark in long runs, especially for new folks. For seasoned runners, it's somewhere around 15 to 20. And so that right there is really helpful information that's when this will start to accumulate, is when you start to accumulate too many miles or too fast of running. And so
this is literally a usage component. Everybody in the running community, obviously, I would say everybody loosely, most runners have this mentality of, I'm going to start running for X, Y, and Z event, and I'm going to go this way on the graph with it, just straight up linear, make progression as time goes on. When it comes to this kind of injury, it is literally the load you're placing demanding on your body, your tissue, versus what it can handle as the capacity. And if you don't keep those relatively even and factor in the component that the more stress you put on your body with the load, you have to give your body time to adapt capacity wise, so that linear progress on the curve actually ends up being more small increase, needing time to plateau and recovery, small increase, plateau, recover for the capacity, and go that stair step kind of model versus straight shot to the moon. So that being said, with that usage, tendons are also a little fickle in the sense that they take time to adapt and heal. They're not like muscular tissue that has a rich blood source. They don't just heal up very quick because of that. They're not as vascular. They don't have that blood supply, so they need time to adapt physically as a tissue for that capacity adaptation to happen. So that being said, with that heel pain, that short flexor group of muscles in the foot from the toes run through there, down through the middle of the foot, and that insertion will be at the heel. So they basically live between the very forward part of your heel up through the toes. And part of the muscle group's job is to help create stability for the foot, reinforcing the arch, helping with balance awareness, all that kind of stuff as well. So the best way to train this is to make them to start to do some work. Do you usually give people the short foot exercise ahead of this? No? Okay, let's skip that one then. So
It's too complicated.
is to let me see what would be a good way to kind of get into this. Go on 4.
Yeah, and then a box. Yep. Sorry, we're just grabbing some equipment here.
So while we're getting this set up, essentially the short flexor group in your foot, their job is to basically take your toes and essentially kind of create the idea of pressure, not necessarily curling the toes underneath, like if you were trying to pick up a sock with your foot or marbles, or getting the toes to fully flex and come underneath themselves. The short flexor group, their job is to basically move the MCP or the knuckle joints down without curling them underneath. So I'm going to bring this over so y'all can see a little bit better. So with this set up over here, you can use this. You can do this with a couple textbooks that get your foot elevated off the ground. You can do this on the edge of a stair. You can do this on a box like we have here. Essentially, the best way to do this is to get your toes up onto the edge of that surface, and you're only getting them up to the edge, up to that main knuckle or that first metatarsal joint, messing up my ankle and my foot. That first metatarsal joint, because we don't want to go past that because it changes the dynamics of how the joints move. So Brian's going to load his toes up onto the box, and he's going to do this with both feet because doing one for me would be pretty impressive and hard. But that same principle of creating pressure and pushing the toes into the box without excessively gripping is what we're looking for here, because we want those short muscle groups to work. And Brian's going to get both feet up on the box, and he's going to do this near a wall so he can help balance himself on here. So I'm going to slide this a little closer so y'all can see still. So again, Brian's knuckles through here are not on the box. He's literally supporting himself through his toes. And as he's up on the box, he's actively pushing the toes in towards the box down this way versus gripping, trying to hold onto the box. And he's literally just trying to keep his foot horizontal. And this first round is just for time, just for holds, anywhere from 10, 15, up to 20 seconds, whatever is tolerable before you get that excessive work in the foot. And you should notice a good amount of tension underneath your toes up through your heel. And you're going to take breaks with this after those intervals. So 20-second holds, 15, whatever you can tolerate that's comfortable. He's going to come off. He's going to give himself a little break. And then he's going to load back up, holding, not even worrying about moving the foot to start. And this is kind of a gauging way to realize how much irritation do you have, how much stress do you have to put into the foot. So if this is relatively comfortable, Brian's going to start progressing by going up onto his heels for a small lift, keeping that pressure. Yep. Oh, sorry. Raising his heels as he's still keeping the pressure of his toes into the box. And he's not going for massive lift through his heels. We don't want to really make his calves and his gastroc and his soleus work. We want to make the emphasis to be on the toes still. So he goes up maybe about 2 to 3 inches at most, and he's going to slowly lower himself back down to right about neutral. It's just a way of progressing the amount of work that small flexor group has to tolerate the demand of supporting the foot and the remainder of the body there. There are a whole bunch of other ways you can continue to progress this. If you have to work both sides, you can continue to do that with increased depth on the foot as well. So height, going up a little higher. You can also get really squirrely and start progressing over to doing single foot work like this for less time. That's very, very challenging for a lot of people. Brian's going to give it a shot, but this is doable.
Not today.
Not today. All right, we're
I already
kidding.
did too much.
But again, if you start to get to the point where you're doing larger intervals for time with both feet and it's feeling very comfortable, there's not enough of a challenge occurring, hold on to a 10-pound weight, 15-pound dumbbell, kettlebell, whatever you have around the house that will provide some resistance, and do that with these raises as well. We just want to give these tendons and this short muscle group the ability to adapt to increased load in a controlled fashion, because when you're going through your gait cycle and you're just going through either your heel strike, your midfoot strike, if you're more of a forefoot strike, whatever, you have to factor in the demand of body weight with the compressive forces of running. It's what do we say, 2.8 to like 11 times like the amount of body weight that goes loaded through the foot. So it's a lot more demand through running on these small tissues that have a lot of responsibility. So giving them time to adapt, strengthen up, and do their work more appropriately is huge.
One of the things to keep in mind when you're rehabbing a tendon is that it's all about what you tolerate. So I just had actually a pro runner that was in here who is having plantar foot pain, and he's got tendinopathy on the bottom of his foot. And his foot started to elicit a pain response after 5 seconds of being on the stairs. But it's very minimal. It's more like the sensation that is present on his one foot, but not present on the other. That's actually an okay sensation to continue to work through. If that sensation progresses to pain, that's when you need to stop. And so that could be a time thing, that could be an intervals thing, that could also just be a temporary thing like, oh, I ran 18 today. I'm trying to do my rehab, but it hurts and it's not feeling any better. That's a good sign that you have already done you've done enough work for that tendon for the day, and it doesn't need rehab, it needs rest. So then you try again the next day. Another way of modifying this is put more of your foot onto the ledge or whatever surface you're using. I've used a 2x4, I've used a textbook, the stairs, we have a box here. But if you think about the foot itself, you're just trying to create a rigid straight line from the toe to the heel. And if you feel yourself excessively curling your toes like you're trying to grip a tree branch, try and think more about you are trying to play the piano with your toes but in like a tapping motion, or pressing down on like a loaf of bread if you make bread. I don't know, sourdough got really popular in COVID, so I don't know if anyone jumped on the sourdough train. I thought about it and then didn't. So that, again, is kind of the principles. And so what we're trying to do is not necessarily give you the answers, but give you the principles that apply to treating these different pathologies. So nerves need mobility, tendons need load, and time.
That's the biggest distinction I'd have to kind of reiterate through both of these. Like Brian mentioned earlier with the nerve mobility exercises, if you do that drill and you start getting a good response and your pain's improving, your function's going up, Yahtzee, it's a nerve problem. If you start running through these for a couple days with the nerve drills and you're like, I kind of feel a little improvement, more or less feels the same, switch over to doing the short flexor exercises for the foot, because that's more of a likely problem. And the thing is, going through those drills will take time. It goes back to that load versus capacity statement. Tendon issues typically have a range from anywhere as, like, best case scenario, 8 weeks potentially, up to as much as 16. They just do not, heal very quickly. They need the load. They need the time to adapt physically because of how the tissue is just designed.
A question that is probably popping up, and I haven't either in your minds or in the chat, is can I run and train through nerve pain and tendinopathy? So essentially, the difference is that you technically can train through both. Nerve pain will continue to progress, and it will make it a little bit more difficult for it to go away. But if you're 3 weeks out from your goal race, it's not that big of a deal. It's gonna, as long as you can run through pain. If you can't run through pain, then you definitely want to rest. Tendon is very similar. When you have a really, really chronic tendinopathy, especially with the Achilles, you run the risk of tendon rupture. But the risk is not significantly greater. It's not, 100 times greater if you have tendinopathy. It's more like 5 to 10% more likely. Don't quote me on that. I haven't read the research recently on the likelihood of rupture. But generally speaking, if you can run through the pain, no worries. It's really a very kind of like person to person thing. What is usually very helpful for people is to have the peace of mind that you're not hurting yourself. You're not creating permanent damage. But if you're early enough in a training cycle, you can get ahead of these injuries, both of them. And I don't like the term injury, these pain syndromes early with 2 to 3 weeks of really focused rehab, getting the right treatment, and staying focused on managing your pain. And then you can kind of reintroduce as much mileage and as much intensity as you can tolerate. And I believe I just got a text message from Chaz about how much we were going to cover tonight. And the answer is as much or as little as you want. I realize it's already 8 o'clock. And because of a patient, I apologize, we got a late start. So Chaz, if you want, go ahead.
And so I did see a question in the chat just regarding hamstring pain, glute pain, possibly even talking about hip, I think would be good.
Sure. What is the name? So just to cover our bases here real quick, someone wanted to know the name of the strap we use to recommend it. Clinically, it doesn't matter. I literally have used a dog leash, so a belt works fine. The strap, the band that we use is like a thick pull-up assist band. So if you go to Amazon, you can put in WODFitter, WODFITTER, or pull-up resistance band, and you'll need a thick one that will tolerate 75 to 100 pounds. Just because the thicker it is, the easier it is to kind of assist yourself.
You can use the belt,
it really
towel,
doesn't matter.
whatever gets around your foot and allows you to move your leg with the towel versus you having to actively use your hip flexors to bring the leg up.
And so the question about high hamstring up into glute, this is kind of thematic with running injuries, and it's very repetitive. So when it comes to the bottom of the foot, the Achilles tendon, and the high hamstring, the two most likely causes are going to be tendinopathy or nerve pain. When it comes to the high hamstring, you can kind of differentiate them through two little tests. If you do like a hamstring stretch and bend forward and touch your toes, and your one side that hurts is way more tight or painful or reproduces your pain with minimal stretch, you could be looking at sciatic nerve pain, which could either be caused at that spot, or it could be coming from the low back, or it could be coming from the glute. The other way to kind of tease this out is through, I do a glute bridge test. And so a glute bridge is just you lie on your back. Tarak, I think that's how I say your name. We will answer that question in a second about stretching. And so to see if it is more related to the tendon, you're going to come up into a glute bridge on your back. So you just squeeze your butt, lift your butt, and now the only thing in contact with the table or ground are your shoulder blades and your feet. And you just start walking your feet away from your butt. If your painful leg starts to Tarek, it's Tarek. Okay, I apologize, but thank you for the phonetic help on that one. If you start to recreate your pain, then it's more likely tendon. And the reason that is because you are loading it and pushing it past its capacity by walking your feet away from your body. And so to treat these, Steve, do you want to walk through how you're treating them?
The hamstring ones?
Yeah.
There's so many fun options. Again, literally, it's all progression for loading. So for this,
yeah.
Okay. So kind of going back to that position that Brian was talking about, if you go into that position where you get your legs bent, go into the bridge, and you start walking those heels out, most people will kind of find themselves getting about 3 or 4 steps in. It's okay, that's really my pain up here, middle hamstring up more towards that insertion towards the glute. This is actually going to be part diagnostic, part treatment as well.
Yeah.
So obviously we're not going to go as far into that progression with the distance. We're going to go into that point where we get the heels nice and close in towards the glute. A little cheat that I actually use is I actually have patients flip the toes up, and it helps with keeping the pressure of the heels into the table or the ground. And then we can do this one of 2 ways. We can literally have somebody walk out about 2 or 3 steps so that both sides are working, and then I literally will either have them sometimes come out with the other leg a few extra inches and emphasize that heel pressure into the table on the affected leg, and they'll get that tension, a little bit of that kind of crampy kind of feeling into the hamstring. But the way that I have them gauge it is I kind of give them a traffic light guide to how much tension, cramping, grabbing they're feeling. So in that position, if the amount of effort that they're feeling is between a 0 to 3, that's our green light. Like, we don't really care about it. It's not doing enough. If it's 4, 5, or 6,
Not doing enough to hurt.
not exactly, not doing enough to hurt it. We're looking to get enough of an effect though. So if it's a 4, 5, or 6, that's our yellow light. That's kind of our sweet spot, because we're making that tissue do enough work that we're going to force the adaptation, but it's also not going to really piss it off, make it significantly worse afterward. If you do that setup and you find yourself kind of feeling like 7 or more out of 10 for discomfort while you're in that isometric position, we're doing a little too much. It's too much hamstring recruitment. The tissue's not physically ready to really hold that position for sustained periods of time. So you can do those positions again, walking out and then a little bit extra distance, pressing heel into the table, holding.
How long?
It's going to depend. Some people won't be able to do this for about 10 seconds comfortably. Other people's, I'll ideally try to have them do it about 15 to 30 seconds, holding it. And this doesn't have to be excruciating. It's going to feel like your hamstring is working, and we want it to work to the point where it's just starting to get fatigued, and then you can drop back down, and you can literally just rep through that position for holds.
When Steve says drop back down, all he's done is find the position of like tolerated work, and then he drops his butt and he picks it back up. His feet are not moving. They're staying in the same spot.
The big thing I always point out with this is when I'm doing that bridge, I'm only doing enough of a bridge to get my pelvis up off the table. And then my emphasis is on my heels going into the table, because I want my hamstring to do the work of getting my legs up off the table. If I want to bridge more, I can bridge more here, but my glutes doing the work now. I want my glutes to be engaged to get my pelvis up enough, but I want my hamstrings to get the emphasis with my heels pressing in. That's where I hold the tension. So I have a minimal bridge, mostly hamstring
recruitment. The way you can progress this is if you have a wooden floor in your home somewhere, if you have some like moving sliders or exercise sliders, those are great as well, because you can, again, get the sliders or get your feet on the hardwood floor, and you can go into that minimal bridge, and you can do single leg sliders, emphasizing that heel pressure out as far out as you can comfortably tolerate, with that heel pressure in, and drag it back in and rep through it slowly. So the emphasis is on the hamstring going out and in.
We just got a good question from Deborah about, is it the heel of the affected leg that is farther out from the body? And good question, it is. Because what you're doing, ideally, this would progress to what Steve was saying, where you're doing single leg work. Because when you're running, you're doing single leg work. So we need to make this always as stressful as running, if not significantly more stressful than running, so that you are exceeding the demand that will be placed on it. So by having the affected heel, 3 inches in front of the other one, you're still able to use your non-affected leg to help you balance, but you're increasing the load in a tolerated kind of like safe environment, in a way that I just repeated myself. In a way that's tolerated, because that's the whole key. Back to the theme of tendons need repetitive, tolerated, and progressive load over a long period of time, anywhere between usually 8 and 16 weeks. But many people start to feel a decrease in pain after 1 week. Some people it takes up to 4 or 5, depending on how hard you're training. The other thing that's interesting about this exercise, or any exercise for any tendon that loads it in a tolerated way before activity, is that it can and most likely will reduce the amount of pain you experience during activity due to something called the warm-up phenomenon, or the warm-up effect, which means when you work the tendon in a way that doesn't piss it off, it provides a pain relieving effect. And that's a good thing. You can use that. And we always recommend that with nerve pain and tendon pain, you use your exercises pretty extensively before you train, so that your training sessions are more tolerable, so that you can get further into runs, or so that you don't change your gait due to pain.
And again, the one thing I'll mention with these hamstring movements, kind of like I focused on that single leg one, you can obviously do those sliding exercises, socks on hardwood, or anything that basically reduces friction is what we're after. Doing the double leg sliders for increased distance. So for the sake of argument, if I'm here and I'm sliding both legs out farther, again, that's totally fine. But if I'm doing the single leg one and I don't have as much distance, that's also just as good, because there's more stress and more load on the single leg. It probably shouldn't be able to go as far on its own when we're not quite adapted to handle that load yet again. So if you kind of try or start teasing out the watch and like, no, single leg work just doesn't happen, run through the double leg work until it gets comfortable. There's no shame in getting your body ready to do the work you need to do. Take your time going through the exercises.
The biggest mistake we see with tendinopathy rehab is everybody, we're runners. Like, hard work is not a problem for this community of people. And so the mindset is more is better, more reps, more weight, more sets. And the answer is actually, it usually is worse, especially early on, because you don't have a lot of flexibility, not range of motion flexibility, but tolerance, to do really stressful things. And so it doesn't matter if you can't even, walk your heels out at all away from your butt. If all you can do is a glute bridge that's mostly pain-free, great, do your glute bridges, give it a week, then try and do the walkouts, then try and do the single leg. And, it could take you 3 or 4 weeks to get out of that pain zone or safe pain zone. And try not to be frustrated. If that's happening, you got to just dig in and know that the assessment that you've done, or the assessment that your clinician or your provider or we've done, is accurate. because of the way they assessed you. They didn't just, poke you somewhere and kind of pull a diagnosis out of a hat. And if they do that, I would highly recommend a second opinion. Doesn't have to be us, but someone. So if it is tendinopathy at the high hamstring, that progression, kind of the glute bridge into the glute bridge walking or the glute bridge sliders, again, very boring, very basic, very effective, especially when done repetitively. The other way to do this would be through a sciatic nerve mobilization, which if we think about the calcaneal, the foot nerve mobilization, where we were seated, you can do the hip one from your back, but the position is the same. So Steve, hop in here, you go for it, I'll hold computer. So Steve's gonna walk through this. His foot, he's got the band around his foot again.
Yep, so the
I'm
band
talking too much.
is around my foot on my affected leg. My other leg is going to be propped up and bent with my heel laying on the floor, just so there's not as much tension in the nervous system on the unaffected leg. And similar kind of concept. And we mostly use some tension on the band with my hand to bring my leg up. In this position, I'm going to take my toes and my foot, and I'm going to put them in that towards me, and I'm going to bring them up using the band to the point that I raise, and I'm going to go right to where I kind of start to notice that tension, irritation, pain up in my hamstring area. And I go, okay, yeah, that's what I usually feel. And from that point, I'm going to drop maybe an inch and a half, so that tension's gone. I don't want to be feeling anything when I start this movement. So that tension is still in my foot. I have my toes, my ankle dorsiflex towards me. And now I'm going to start, I'm going to do head or hip. Okay. So now I'm going to flip between my foot and my hip. So I'm going to release the tension in my foot and my toes and plantar flex them, point them away from me as I let my hip come up towards me and I raise it up with the band. So I'm basically putting slack on one end of the nerve at its farthest away location and putting some more tension up on the nerve in my hip near my hamstring, my glute. And then I'm going to flip between the two of those. I bring my hip down and lower it, and I put a little bit of tug, toes, ankle back in that plantar flex position towards my head. And I'm just going to slowly alternate between the two of those. Hip comes up, toes go down. Toes go up, hip comes down. And I'm holding onto the band just to keep my leg in that position. And as you're flipping through these two movements, you should barely notice that tension kick on. And it's going to feel closer to the hamstring when the hip comes up, farther away into the leg, potentially, as the toes come up.
The whole time, Steve is basically doing a straight leg hamstring stretch on his back. He's just alternating where the tension is on the nerve. So if he pulls his toes to his knee, still with a straight knee, and he's got maybe anywhere between a 45-degree angle at the hip or 90, like an L again. So go back to the previous one where I was in an L sit. Then he is able to kind of manipulate which part of the nerve is getting the most mobilization. So if he points his toe, the whole sciatic nerve slacks like a piece of rope. So he brings his whole leg, still straight leg, higher towards his chest to increase the tension at his hip.
Let's drop back down again. This is actually kind of a really cool self-check, depending on how much irritation you have, you can tolerate. So when you're initially bringing your leg up to that tension point, make a note of it, kind of see how far along it is. And as you go through your reps between tension in the foot on and off, hip movement on and off, I haven't moved off the table. I've only been lifting my head and the leg. If I go to put that tension up on my foot again and I bring my leg up, that's where I get to now.
Meaning his range of motion increased. The reason it increased was because the thing that was preventing, quote unquote, the hamstring range of motion was not actually the hamstring, it was the sciatic nerve. And so you have to kind of check in with yourself, because the range of motion of the tension will increase as you're doing the exercise, which is a really fun as Steve said, trick. Sometimes it feels like magic where people come in and we ask them to try and touch their toes. They can't come even close. We floss their sciatic nerve or mobilize their sciatic nerve. And all of a sudden they can touch their toes and they're like, well, what the heck just happened? Like, is this voodoo? It's like, no, the thing preventing the mobility in that area was not the hamstrings. It technically was your brain. Your brain was not allowing you to keep bending forward because the amount of tension on the sciatic nerve, if you kept going, it could have damaged it.
Right, and the other thing is too, you have to remember that the hamstring is a 2-joint muscle. It crosses the knee and it crosses the hip. The whole time your leg is straight, so nothing is changing with the hamstring portion that goes past the knee. The only part that's really moving is technically the part that crosses over the hip. And we put a little bit of tension on and off that area with the nerve. We didn't affect the rest of the muscle. That stayed in the same place the whole time. So for me to be able to relax my leg straight down again and bring it up to that position, we didn't really play with the hamstring. It was literally just moving the nerve more comfortably through the tissue up by the hip and as it travels down the leg.
Again, the thing to keep in mind here is repetitions. The more you do with this, as long as it's not a big stretch, the better. We've had patients who have treated this like a stretch and come back in 3 days and they're like, I'm so much worse. What happened? And we ask them, how did you do your exercises? And they'll show us and say, what are you feeling? It's like big stretch, lots of pain.
Yeah, they went full send.
They really went for it, which isn't wrong. Like the enthusiasm is going to help you in this instance. It just has to be kind of tempered so that you're not feeling your pain or a lot of stretch. There is go ahead, jump in there.
So, I just wanted to have people have an opportunity to ask any questions that they have as well, or if there are specific areas of pain that they're dealing with or that they're wanting to know a little bit more about.
Sure.
If anyone does have those questions, just please unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I will answer Tarek's question about his question was he's heard lots of people say that calves, hamstrings, etc. affect the plantar fascia or plantar fasciitis, and the question is, should we stretch our calves and hamstrings to help relieve the plantar fascia pain? It is not a clear-cut question, and this is one of those moments where Steve and I kind of differ from conventional thinking here, because the research has kind of progressed beyond that type of thinking. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that the clinical research has kind of progressed away from that. And so previously, yes, calf stretching, hamstring stretching was a very common prescription for plantar foot pain. The reason for that makes sense. And it's because the tissue, all the tissue from the butt to the hamstring, to the calf, to the foot are literally, and this sounds silly, connected. They touch each other and they affect each other. So theoretically, yes, you could release, I don't like that word, you could reduce some of the tension that is globally coming through what's called the posterior chain, meaning hamstring and the calf, to reduce tension on the plantar fascia. However, in most cases, the plantar fascia is not the problem. And so we do not prescribe any stretching for almost any pain presentation. Static stretching in and of itself has been shown in research not to do a whole lot. You'll get a temporary increase in range of motion, but the second you go run again, the brain is going to light that area up with tension, and it really won't have an effect. So these are kind of those moments where we often get a little pushback from people because these things are so commonplace, the ball rolling and stretching and things like that. And in the age of social media, information is so readily available, but it doesn't mean it's clinically accurate information. So to answer your question, It, from our standpoint, is not something that we recommend. However, there's a caveat to everything. If you are getting relief and it is helping you, keep doing it. If it's working, great. Everyone is different in how they respond to things, and that's where art meets science meets clinical care. Because if we have a patient who comes in who clearly has nerve pain, and we're doing all the nerve flossing in the world, and they're not getting better, then we got to figure something out, because there's got to be more tools in the toolbox there. And it doesn't matter that it's nerve pain, because they're not responding. So we need to figure out what's next. And that's when you get creative and you communicate with your patient and you ask them what they've done in the past that's helpful. Hopefully we've already done that from the beginning. But so that's the caveat to everything, is that just because it's the right treatment and the right tool doesn't mean it's
Right for you.
doesn't mean it's right for you. So that is key to everything. It has to work for you. So if it's working for you, keep doing it. If the ball rolling is working, go for it. But if these tools that you've had aren't working, they probably aren't magically going to accumulate enough repetition to start working, especially if you've been doing it for weeks and weeks and weeks. Like at that point, it's time for plan B. And that could mean a lot of things. Doesn't mean that Steve and I have all the answers. This is just where the research is. And this is what we've kind of discovered through clinical care. Uh-oh, where did our check go?
Yeah, that's great info.
So I feel like if you took anything away from tonight, it would be that treating and assessing these injuries should not be as difficult as it feels and as it seems. Meaning, if you've been dealing with something for years, like chronic plantar foot pain, that should not be. There has to be something else there. Like clinically, chronic plantar fasciitis, I might put my foot in my mouth tomorrow, a year from now, 10 years from now, does not exist. It is definitely something else. Same thing with low back pain, hamstring pain, T-band, outside of the knee pain. There are really good answers for these things, and you should feel confident that you are getting better very soon, like very quickly. First 1 to 4 visits if you're working with a clinician, unless they have told you exactly why you won't. Such is the case with tendinopathy, where it might take you 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. I've had someone go 6 weeks of rehabbing their Achilles until it finally started to come around, but he stuck to the program and now he runs pain-free, and he had chronic Achilles pain for years and years and years, which is probably why it took so darn long. Another question would be soaking feet in really cold water and then really hot water and alternating many times. It depends on the presentation. Depending if I think there is an acute inflammation, such as maybe an acute tendonitis, or even a little bit of bone pain that's not really a stress reaction or a stress fracture yet, I will prescribe ice baths. Do you do that?
Occasionally, it really depends on the time frame. I mean, if it's fresh, yeah. I mean, we want to play with like the hot, cold components, things like that, because that does have an effect when these things are relatively new. There's still some degree of an inflammatory component that goes into it. The farther away we get away from it, I know Brian and I will both kind of definitely start to steer away from ice, because if you need to start getting, blood supply into things, whether it's the nerve, the tendon, whatever, heat's going to be your best option for that.
Mm-hmm.
Ice is strictly like, it happened today, like you rolled an ankle, like it's fresh kind of injury. Like you need to get rid of your body's immune response and dampen it to avoid swelling, avoid all the heat, the redness, all that kind of stuff. That's where ice kind of fits into the picture. The farther away you get away from the time frame for your body's immune response or inflammatory reaction of like 10, 12, 14 kind of days, you're transitioning away from that again, because that reaction is more or less capped out. And you can still do a little bit of it, but like
even 21 days into it, we're past that.
One other rule of thumb is nerves like heat.
They're not-
Tendons like heat.
Nerves like heat because their blood supply, every single nerve in your body has its own little blood vessel that runs with it. It's minuscule compared to the nerve of itself. But it does have a direct blood supply, and it just doesn't happen to have a large one. So heat will help with the blood flow to the nerve, makes the nerve happier.
So the answer to the question is yes, no, maybe, it depends. But generally speaking, if you have signs of inflammation, meaning swelling, redness, or heat, and it was traumatic, like an ankle, like you rolled an ankle, and you can't weight bear, I would go get an x-ray, very specifically. If it's like bottom of the foot, just started happening, you could give the ice heat a try for 2 to 3 days. But again, there's not a clear answer here when it comes to that question. And so when in doubt, I think the best answer truly is to have a team of people who you know and trust, who you can email, set up an appointment, text, shoot a note on Instagram, something to get some clinical advice, especially if you're weeks out from something really important to you, like a marathon or a 5K that you've been training for, or that sort of thing. There are a lot more questions than answers. So Vivian asked, is it good to use BioFreeze? People love BioFreeze. I think it is a helpful tool in managing pain. From a inflammatory standpoint, it's not going to give you this like significant change in your pain. There are other over-the-counter options. There's something called Voltaren, which is a topical NSAID. It is not within our scope of practice to make any sort of medical recommendations as far as medications, creams, or anything like that. But a lot of athletes use Voltaren with some success. And then good old-fashioned Advil, ibuprofen, Aleve. But that's not our recommendation. It's our scope of practice, so we can't kind of speak to that. And another comment was that Tarek said his plantar foot pain, plantar fasciitis did really well using instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization to scrape the plantar. And the therapist said it was bringing blood to the area. And that is true. It is going to increase local tissue vascularity, which is blood flow. It also is going to mobilize the nerve, etc.
Kenny, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I just got a quick question for a two-part question actually for you guys. That was my question with the hamstring and up to the mid glute. I think it's my sciatic nerve. Is that okay to still run on for you guys to recommend? I mean, your opinion on that, and also what's you guys' opinion on ice baths after long runs?
So just so I'm clear, your question was, is it okay to run if you're having sciatic nerve pain? Was that the first question?
Yeah, because I think that my question was the hamstring one, and I think it's
Oh.
more the sciatic nerve versus a tendonitis in the hamstring or tendon swelling in the hamstring.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't done the bridge test yet. But I think it's my sciatic nerve.
Okay. Steve?
Again, it's subjective to you in terms of how much discomfort are you having, how far are you going into your runs before it starts to bother you. You kind of have to tease those out, but I mean, generally, unless it is like this is my personal recommendation that I usually kind of work with my patients. Unless it is like debilitating you and you cannot go into a run for more than like a mile, I would say this is the point where we kind of modify your miles, gauge your pain, things like that, and tease it out. I say this as my own personal clinical opinion. I don't like to take things entirely off the table. We modify our activities with our patients because if you love doing it, why should we stop you from doing it? We work around these things. So it really needs to be gauged out with your mileage, your training, all that kind of stuff. And then the other part was the ice baths.
Yeah, ice baths after a long run. Just your guys' opinion on that.
How long are we talking?
Anything 12 plus miles. You know, a lot of people say take them. A lot of people say they don't like them or don't need them. But I just want to see what your other opinion is.
I don't usually make the recommendation for it.
When I was doing a lot of training, I used ice baths during long runs. I thought they were helpful. I use them a lot, actually. I don't do them anymore, mostly because I'm a wuss. And they're really uncomfortable and I don't like it. But from a research standpoint, and the topic is always, what does the research say? There is interesting and compelling positive data to show that an ice bath immediately following a bout of exercise that creates muscle tissue damage, like a long run, will is not the right word, can improve your recovery and improve your time to returning to non-sore running. So, and then also, if you like doing them and you get out and you feel like $1,000,000, do it, not because we are like placating you, but because you are investing mentally and emotionally in an activity that is going to help you. And if you are in that state of mind, the neurotransmitters and the hormones that are released in your brain literally will help you recover. So that's the interesting caveat back to the ball rolling and the stretching.
If it works for you, that's you. Your
working.
Your body's capacity to run 10, 12 miles is gonna be somebody different from somebody else's. It's all what works for you, N of one. This is your show. How do we make it the best we can make it?
So to answer your question, I think what Steve was saying is, yes, you can run on sciatic nerve pain. It really depends on those factors. You're not going to permanently damage it. It might hurt a lot more, but you're not going to have permanent sciatic nerve pain. You may have prolonged sciatic nerve pain, but it's not like if you run this marathon on sciatic nerve pain or whatever race that you're going to have this pain the rest of your life. That's not how it works. Thankfully, that's not how it works.
Thanks.
No
Got
problem.
it.
Yeah.
There was a question. It looked like you were going to jump in there.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to answer the last question about the cryotherapy. If we're thinking about cryotherapy, the like stand-up tank that they like surround you in nitrous, or
they freeze you. You're a popsicle.
Yeah. They turn you into a popsicle, but it's only for like 90 seconds or like 2 minutes. Again, there's some interesting data around it as far as global inflammatory markers and things like that. If you can afford it and you like it, amazing. If you can't afford it or you hate it,
get some ice cubes.
Then I think the ice bath is a great way to go. You can buy 10 pounds of ice at 7-Eleven for $4. Or you can stock up with your ice cube trays using 1 gallon Ziploc bags, which is what I do because I'm cheap. Or I did because I don't do ice baths anymore. Chaz, fire away, my friend.
Yeah. So I just want to thank both you, Dr. Kent and Dr. Lasky, for all the great information that you provided us tonight. And I'll be sure to send out your contact information, Instagram, and if people are in the Boston area or even in New England, Forward Spine and Sport, if you do have any issues that do come up, they can help you with that. And so this video was recorded, so hopefully I can send that video out to everyone, just so they'll be able to go over everything and really hone into all of the different exercises that you guys suggested as well.
And if this is something that you all found helpful, we would love to kind of keep ticking away at some of the most common things. If it was helpful, we would love to come hang out with you all again. You all have been really great, asked a lot of questions, which makes it more fun for us as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Our pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you, Chaz.
Good luck
Thanks.
with your training, everyone. Stay safe, stay smart, and keep wearing a mask.
That's right.
Good to know.
Yeah.